All right, everyone. I think we're gonna get this kicked off here now. My name is Jake Robinson. I'm the water efficiency specialist with the City of Greeley. I'm happy to introduce Lisa Pace, the water conservation lead for the Colorado Springs Utilities. And she's going to be talking today about designing drought-ready landscapes. So whenever you're ready, Lisa, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me tonight. I hope you were as excited as I am for this class. I've been working in the landscape industry for over 20 years, probably closer to 30 now. And, to me, um, landscapes play such an integral part of our lives. And with where we are today, with our water scarcity, with what's happening with climate, um, I really love to be able to work in this field where I get to play around with, drought ready or water wise or xeriscape type garden. So no matter what you want to call it, I hope you walk away today with some information that helps you with your own landscape. And as Jake mentioned, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat as we work through this presentation. Jake will cue those up for me, or I'll try to take a look as well to see what you guys were hoping to learn. So with that, let's begin. So the very first thing we need to talk about is we need to talk about where we live. And when you tell somebody you live in Colorado, this is generally what they think of, right? They think of these amazing mountains, these tall peaks, this snow that's everywhere, and these aspen trees and spruce trees and these wonderful, alpine lakes. But in reality, that's not where the majority of people live in Colorado. Most people live on the eastern plains. And in Colorado, that means that it's going to be this short grass prairie. And this area is actually in the rain shadow of the Rocky Mountains, and it's really actually a high and dry steppe climate. And it's going to be dominated by short grasses, so things like blue grama or buffalo grass. And so when we talk about, a drought-ready or water-wise landscape, I like to look to what's around us for inspiration. And for us all on the Front Range, it's going to be this low grass prairie. And so it won't be a surprise, but I'm going to talk a lot about native grasses and how you can integrate them into your landscape today, because this is really where most of us live. And this is really the landscape that we have that we should be looking to for inspiration. So we're not going to talk about Colorado or drought-ready landscapes without talking about the idea of what is the current drought status in Colorado. And right now, about half of it is in a moderate to severe drought. And this was just taken from March 5th, so just about a week ago. And you can see how much of the state is really suffering. In fact, if we even go a little bit deeper and look at the snowpack levels, you'll find that most of the snowpack levels are somewhere around 50 to 67% of kind of the historical average. So this means that we are, one, in a drought scenario already, and two, the snow melt that we're going to get to help fill our reservoirs is probably going to be a little lower than normal this year. So we really have to make sure that the water we use outdoors is really being put to the most beneficial use. And for us, that means really creating a drought-ready landscape. That's going to be the future of our landscapes in Colorado. I thought about giving you a bunch of photos of like how xeriscaping has progressed over the years. And in the end, I just really wanted to focus on what are the options for the future. And this is a great solution. So you may not know it, but this grass in this photo is actually sundancer buffalo grass. It looks like traditional turf grass, but it's not. You'll need to water it once a week, mow it about once a month, and fertilize it once a year. So it's a really amazing low water native grass that is a great solution for us. And in the Greeley area, I think this is actually the best solution for front yards. The rest of this landscape also has low water plant materials, so we'll talk about that as well. But we can create drought-ready, beautiful landscapes that represent where we live and still have a really beautiful community. In the end, we need our landscapes to not just be drought tolerant, but also be a great place that's going to support people and pollinators. So let's bring ecology back into our urban environments by inviting, birds and insects into our landscapes. So what really makes up a drought-ready landscape? Well, it's going to come down to two main topics: low water grasses and planting beds. And so that's how I've broken up this presentation. We're first going to talk about what are the native low grass lawn and native area solutions that you can use. And then we'll talk about the planting beds and what plants do well in a low water scenario. So whenever I talked about native grasses, I like to talk about the native grass spectrum. And this concept is really looking at everything from high water turfgrass lawns to completely unmanaged natural areas. And in between the two, we have a lot of different options. So we're going to concentrate on three of these options. We're going to talk about native grass lawn solutions, which is basically like a one-for-one. So it's that picture I just showed you where we're going to take out a high water turfgrass lawn and just put in a native lawn solution. Then we're going to get into what I like to call organized nature. And this is where, again, you might take out your big, backyard or front yard, and you're going to actually create some turf grass, but you're also going to create some planted area. And maybe you're integrating the two in kind of this transition space. So organized nature is where we start to color outside of the lines, and we no longer think of a landscape system as, this is my patch of grass that's surrounded by edging, and then I have mulch or rock, and that's where I put my shrubs and perennials. This concept of organized nature blends those lines and really allows you to do more with your space and show off these amazing native plants that we have. In the third area, we're going to talk about managed yet natural. So this is maybe if you have a really big backyard and you want to transition to open space, or you just want to be able to fill the landscape with some native plant solutions. This kind of naturalistic landscape is going to combine a bunch of different species of grasses along with forbs and shrubs and other plant material to really give you a beautiful low water solution that's easy to maintain and covers a lot of ground. So let's talk about native grass lawns. This is actually Pippa. This is my coworker's dog, and she is standing in a front yard full of Sundancer buffalo. This is the same grass I mentioned earlier, and I think this grass would do outstanding where any place that has clay. So this lawn is going to stay short. It's only going to be 3 to 6 inches tall, so therefore it requires minimal mowing. It loves full sun and clay soils, which some other grasses don't appreciate. And it creates this very great turf forming type look. So it feels very traditional. It feels like, your normal Kentucky bluegrass. But it's not. It's a low water native solution. It's good for slopes, and it does tolerate some moderate traffic. So as you just saw, Pippa was in the front yard hanging out. People oftentimes ask me what happens if my dog goes to the bathroom in this space. I can tell from personal experience at the garden, this is like one of the favorite places for our neighborhood dogs to go, and it's not a problem. Now, if you had a large dog, like let's say you had a 60 or 70 pound lab who was in the backyard all the time running across the grass, that would be more of a high traffic scenario. So the grass isn't going to tolerate that much traffic, but it'll do fine with the occasional dog or a smaller dog that's out there for maybe an hour a day. It's going to handle that traffic just fine. So this is further away, but this is Sam's front yard. And his front yard, we helped him transition through our residential turf replacement program. So that's a program where we work with customers to teach them how to convert their high water turf grass to a low water lawn solution. And when they have the space totally prepped and ready, we give them the seed to make it happen. This is 1 year into his project. So we've really been able to figure out how to grow this seed for buffalo grass and get a full lawn fairly fast. I'll show you how using plugs can take a little bit longer, so you can kind of see that progression. But with Sundancer buffalo, you don't have to have a small area of turf grass. You can have a large area of turf grass because this is low water. It only needs to be watered about once a week. And if it rains that week, you don't water. So you can save anywhere from 60 to 80% of the water that is typically used for high water turf grass. And is sod available? It is currently not available because this grass takes a little bit longer to grow and the root system on this grass is really deep. So when they cut it for sod, it used to be available, but it would fall apart when they were actually delivering it to people. So there's no buffalo grass sod available that I'm aware of, but you might be able to find some online. So this is one view of a Sundancer buffalo grass lawn. Here's a close-up of another coworker of mine, Scott's front yard, and you can just see how beautiful dark green it is. And you can choose to mow this once a month. At the garden, I only mow it like two or three times for the year. So it's really a low maintenance grass solution that's also extremely low water. So it's awesome for our Colorado yards. Here's Prestige buffalo grass. So this little patch of green over on the right behind the Easy Care sign, that is another type of buffalo grass, but that one you have to plant in plugs, and I'll show you what that looks like. But what's cool about Prestige is that it's actually female-only plants. So this one stays really tight and really low to the ground and doesn't get the little flowers like Sundancer can. So when you get these plugs, you plant them about 6 inches on center. So this is us planting in June, and I should tell you that all of our native grasses, you actually want to plant them in summertime rather than early spring, or at least these warm season ones. So here we are planting in June. That's intentional because it needs that warm weather to really grow. Then August, it's going to start to fill in, but you can see these plugs. It's not like they're going to create a total coverage within a few months. They're slow growing, and that's part of the reason why they're low water, because they're not going to grow exceptionally fast. But as you can see, just 1 year in, you have a full coverage area. With seed, we can get here by the end of the summer. With plugs, it's really going to take you about a year. Now, the other really cool thing about buffalo grass is, although it's a lawn, it gets an amazing fall color. So here it is in October, and it just started to put on this beautiful yellow and pink hue. So it gives you some things that your normal lawn may not give you. Now, I should tell you, this warm season grass isn't going to be green in March. It's not growing yet. It really needs that heat to start to grow. So you would see this start to green up in May. And by the end of May, it's totally green and beautiful and really filled in like this. And this photo, you can also see these little stolons that kind of run on top of the ground. That's part of what makes this grass sod forming, is it will spread by itself, but it's going to take a little long to get there. This particular grass area, I only mow twice a year. So it's extremely low water and very, very easy to maintain. Next, I'm going to talk about my second favorite grass, which is actually blue grama grass. This is our state grass because it's so adaptable and it's found all over Colorado. It gets to be about 6 to 18 inches tall, and that's if you count the seed heads. And it really needs full sun, but can do okay if there's a little bit of shade. So here you can see where some trees shade out a portion of the grass. That's okay. Blue grama is going to tolerate that. Buffalo really wants full sun. So make sure if you're going to use, if you have any shade, that you should consider some blue grama. This grass also will do great all the way up to 8,500 feet in elevation. The buffalo grass, you need to be a little bit lower. I usually tell people below about 6,800 feet. And the other great thing about blue grama is it'll tolerate any soil type. So if you have decomposed granite, sand, clay, blue grama will take it all. So it's a really easy grass to grow. Here it is in our front yard in Colorado Springs. And this is an area that had high water turf grass in the past, and it just never did really well because it was full sun, super sandy soils. And the blue grama, as soon as it's planted, just took off. It really did amazing and became really easy for this homeowner to manage this. And you can see in this photo, it's a little taller. You don't have to keep it mowed super short. In fact, I'll show you some mowed and not mowed, but you can choose what you would like to do. In this next photo, this is actually in the Fort Collins area. This is a Loretta Mannix job. And on this photo, you can see there's a small area of grass over on the left. And this works. This works for this front yard. She's got a beautiful area of perennials and grasses, and then she kept a little kind of postage stamp of blue grama just to give that kind of green front yard curb appeal. I like to use a bit more grass in terms of that grass to bed ratio, but we'll talk about that in a few more photos. So this next photo shows you what it looks like if it's mowed and if it's kept relatively short. Now, blue grama is a bunch grass, so it's not going to spread really far laterally. It's just wherever there's a seed, there's a plant. But it's a really great looking grass, as you can see from this photo. Here's what it looks like if you don't mow it. If you mow it once in the spring and let it grow tall, this is how tall it's going to get, and then it will get seed heads on top of that. I think it's beautiful when it's tall. It tends to blow in the wind and you kind of get these rolling waves across the grass. We do water this. We water this about once a week, just like the buffalo grass earlier. And similar thing, you can mow it once a month if you want to keep it short. So it doesn't need weekly mowing, but you might find yourself mowing every month. And then I would tell you to fertilize it once a year. So it's a really easy grass to maintain. Now, one of the superpowers of blue grama is that it grows in so fast. It will start to show like a green coverage within a couple weeks. So this is us actually seeding that lawn, and you can see within 3 weeks, most of the area is filled in. And it is completely solid by the end of the summer. So this grass grows exceptionally fast and does a good job outcompeting weeds, which I think is really great. Now, just like with buffalo grass, how I told you, like it has a fall color that makes it really pretty. Sometimes what I like to do with buffalo or blue grama is actually plant bulbs inside the turf area. So in the picture on the bottom left, you can see these little pink floating balls. That's actually the Allium astroscianum. And they get to be about 6 to 8 inches tall. This is like the beginning of June. And this is the 1 year after we seeded this lawn, so you can see how full it is within a year. And these little bulbs just float right atop top of the grass blades and just give you some more interest and color and do something with your lawn space that most people don't really think about. But you could actually make it in almost like a bulb planting bed in a way. Now, blue grama lawns can be used in any instance. They can be used in a moderate home in the middle of Colorado Springs, but it can also be used, this is actually an example of a historic home in the old north end of Colorado Springs. And so in this instance, the homeowner replaced the grass herself. She took our class and we helped her. We helped her learn how to do it, and she did the work. But you can see how it fits right into her really kind of traditional style landscape. And if I didn't tell you this was blue grama, chances are you would have just thought it was Kentucky bluegrass or some other grass. So it can really be used in any landscape. Here we have this little cottage home. This is in Old Colorado City, so kind of the southwest part of Colorado Springs. And here they chose not to mow it. They're letting it grow taller. And it also fits right into this landscape. So really it can be used in any style in any neighborhood. Now I want to talk about the next section, which is kind of this organized nature. So those last photos were all a 1-for-1. You took out the high water turf grass, you bring in a low water grass solution. Now we're going to talk about mixing it up. So we're not just creating a lawn, we're going to do a little bit more with that space. So in this next progression, this is our prairie garden at our demonstration garden. And here we tried this new concept. So this whole corner is covered with one irrigation zone, a pop-up MP rotator spray zone. So it has a nozzles on it that kind of look like fingers that rotate. And I should tell you the pop-up heads in the space range from 6 inches to 12 inches in the back, so they can spray over the plant material. But rather than having this be one solid flat lawn, we broke it into 2 spaces. We have about 1/3 of Sundance, our buffalo, in the front that is getting seeded. And then in the back 2/3, we planted it with native ornamental grasses, and all sorts of wildflowers. And then between those plants, after we planted them, we seeded in with more grass seed. So there is no mulch, there is no edging, there is no, small rock that's covering the ground. This becomes one living carpet of a bunch of plants. So this is what it looks like kind of 1 year in. You can see most of the seed has filling in, but we still have a few patches that need some work. And then here's what it looks like by the end of that next summer. So you can see this really short buffalo grass. Those are the flowers on the grass I mentioned earlier. That kind of surrounds the prairie bed. And then we go to this mixture of ornamental grasses and wildflowers behind it. This is what it looks like from the back of the bed. This is what it looks like from the front. And so we do mow this buffalo grass 2 or 3 times a year, but that's it. And I really love this because if you have a large yard space, but you don't need it, you could choose to break up that space into this type of setting where you have this kind of wild prairie border across the back, and you have this beautiful more lawn-like space at the front. We jokingly call this our landscape mullet, where it's business in the front, party in the back, because that's what it really kind of means to us as we have this wild and crazy, very naturalistic space and this more tidy lawn space. So this is a great way to mix up your lawn if you currently don't use it. And come fall, this bed just comes alive. So this is those same plants as the last photo, just what it looks like later in the year. So not only does this give you some lawn space that you can use, but it also gives you all this beautiful color and texture that is really native and very low water. So this type of landscape is options on what we can do. And I believe that this is better than a big mulch bed or a big rock area with plants planted in it, because those areas you're going to have to replace the mulch, you're going to have to weed in between the plants, where this type of living ground cover just knits together and gives you this beautiful patchwork kind of quilt of these native plants. So just a few of these in the back. That tall one that's kind of red, that is big blue stem. Right next to it with the brown seed heads, that is Indian grass. Then we have some switch across the front. The pink kind of cloud that weaves in and out, that is undaunted ruby muley grass. And the tan seed heads that you see on the grasses across the front, that is blonde ambition blue grama. There's some aster in here, there's some Indian paintbrush, there's ratibida, there's a butterfly weed, there's a ton of different perennials that are growing in here. But this landscape I really love, and I think it really represents this prairie landscape that we all live in exceptionally well, and is something we can embrace in our landscapes. Now, I'm showing you what it looks like in fall, but I want to share with you a video I took of this same space in, I would say this was late June. So here we are. And here you can see it was a really windy day, but the grasses don't care. They are so well adapted to the wind and the heat that we have that it doesn't bother them. They actually thrive in this condition. You can also see how inviting the lawn space looks. So that's the Sundancer buffalo right there. And you can also see right next to the rock, if you didn't mow it at all, that's how tall it would get. That's it. So mowing a couple times a year can really give you that lawn appearance while still giving you a very naturalistic low water solution. You can also choose to mix these two grasses. So here we have buffalo grass and blue grama combined, and they mow the front and they do not mow the back. So they didn't get as crazy as we did in the last one where we planted a lot of individual plants. Here they predominantly seeded and planted a few things like juniper, and I believe this big silver one in back is going to be a western sage. There might even be some fringed artemisia in here. So you wouldn't have to plant a ton of plants. You could do it predominantly by seed and just mow part of it and not mow the other part. This also shows you what those seed heads look like on blue grama if you chose to not mow it at all. I should tell you that from a fire-wise perspective, you do want to mow these grasses once they've gone completely dormant for the season. So when they've turned totally brown, you do want to mow them. But when they're green, they're actually rated a 9 out of 10 in terms of being fire-wise. So they're rated really high as good plants for a fire-wise solution when they're green. When they're brown, you just got to make sure you cut them down. So the third area I want to talk about when it comes to grasses is managed yet natural. And so this is going to show us sometimes where we do plant things and we mix seed in, but we're really not creating those designated lawn spaces. We're going to let it all blend, just like in this photo. This photo is a prairie area that I planted 1 year prior to taking this photo. So you can see how much these plants want to be here. In 1 year, it completely filled in and looked amazing. Now, this type of landscape, you can get away with watering a couple times a month. It all depends on how full you want it to be. So here I can show you a photo. This is a backyard where this is a large backyard where they back up to open space, and they wanted to have this transition. They also didn't want to spend a huge amount of time on weeding beds, so they went with a short grass prairie mix. So this mixture is going to have 5 or 6 warm and cool season species. It's going to grow between 12 and 18 inches tall. You know, this is really drought resilient in terms of you could do no irrigation on this. It is going to thin out over time, but it is a great way to cover the ground. If you just mowed this a few times, or sorry, not mowed, if you just watered this a few times a year, you would find you would get this really filled in look. And you're going to get that because when you mix species, whichever species likes that one particular spot the most, that's the one that's going to grow. And if you get a wetter year, those species that like a little bit more water are going to grow more. And if you get a dry year, the species that like a little bit drier are going to grow more. So with this concept, you are not trying to control the landscape. You're really letting nature do its thing. So we would recommend that you mow this once a year, and usually we tell people early spring, but if you did back up to this wild urban interface, you probably want to do it in fall just to reduce your wildfire risk. And you can add perennials or wildflowers and shrubs to this space because the native grasses that we have can really do a good job helping to support other wildflowers and forbs and woody plant material. And mixing in those things is what's going to attract your pollinators, birds, and your wildlife. So this shot is that same grass area just from the house. And so it's hard to see, but the front portion of this picture is only about 1/3, and then that back grass hillside is about 2/3. So you can cover a lot of space with this type of landscape, and that's going to minimize your maintenance requirements. In the beginning, you might find yourself having to do some weed control, but once you get that grass established, that's going to do a good job keeping your weeds at bay. And like I mentioned earlier, if you've got native grass on the ground, you're not going to be replacing mulch or having to go out there and rake, pine needles or leaves off of your rock mulch. So from a maintenance perspective, this is a lot easier to maintain long term. Now, you could decide to do a custom grass mix where maybe you're choosing something a little bit taller or something really particular for your site. So this building is actually in downtown Colorado Springs, and the grass, the dominant grass that you're seeing in this photo is side oats grama. It's one of my favorite. It has this really erect, upright stem with these seed heads that come off the sides like little flags. And it's a beautiful, stunning, it adds architecture to your space, and it's also heavily adaptable, especially here in Colorado. So you can create a custom mix to play off your architecture or to play off of site specifics that you might have. So in this next photo, as you can see, there's kind of a swale that runs through the middle. And by using a mix designated for your site, you could choose grasses that are going to do better in that riparian zone. And then you can also include grasses that are going to do better on the upland area or on the hill area that isn't going to have as much water. So you could create these custom mixes for your landscape. And this is actually at High Plains Environmental Center, up there kind of close to Fort Collins. And if you were to go visit this site today, you would find that it's surrounded by houses. So those native hillsides you see in the back are now all single-family residential. This is another example of where you're letting nature do its thing. So this is actually a townhome complex over in the Estes Park area. And here there's a grass seed mixture and a bunch of wildflowers mixed in. And Joan Sapp, who is a landscape designer, she really just let these plants flow into one another and really mimic what nature is doing in the area. So I believe you can use this whether you're at a townhome, whether it's your backyard, or if you're a commercial site. You could really integrate grasses into your landscape. I like to make grasses about, half to 2/3 of my landscape because I know that it's resilient, low water, can survive a drought, and doesn't need a lot of maintenance. And so for HOAs or commercial properties, like I mentioned, this is a great way to take care of the large common spaces that you have around your community or your facilities. Now we're going to talk about planting beds. So just like the grass spectrum, there's kind of this spectrum on planting beds where sometimes people tell me, Lisa, I want low water and I want drought resilient, but I don't want it to look too messy. And there's a whole lot of plants that do a great job, are low water, and feel quite traditional. So that's what I tend to call it, like more traditional style planting beds. They can still be drought resilient, but they're just not going to have, they're going to have characteristics that feel more traditional or kept in the landscape. Then on the other side of the spectrum, I like to think of organized nature. So this is again where we're going to mix in more plant material. We're going to let them blend. It is intentional in how we are planting these plants. And it's still going to be lower on the maintenance side, lower on the weed management side, because these plants are filling in this space more completely than like a traditional system. So let's look at these. So here's a quick example from our garden. This is actually our plant select garden. And when I think of traditional low water plants, one of the very first things that come to mind is salvia. This is a type of blue salvia, and the pink in there is a rose queen salvia. But in this instance, we have rock mulch across the ground, and that salvia is just seeding itself in this space, but really filling it in. Now, in planting beds, I like to talk about some specific plants. And the first one beyond salvia, because most of you know that, I want to point out things that are a little more unique. So in the middle of this photo, there is a light blue perennial, and that is actually Eastern Blue Star. So Eastern Blue Star is this really wonderful, very early blooming, small perennial that's usually between 2 and 3 feet. So I say small because it's not going to be, 8 to 10 feet tall. But this perennial, it blooms really early and then it just fills in this space and creates a wonderful kind of river in planting beds. So there are different types of Eastern Blue Star, or Blue Star, I should say. There is a native one called Colorado Desert Blue Star. We do see that over by our demonstration garden. But there's also one called Hubrick's Blue Star, which has a very fine foliage and tends to be really, really, really low water. You'll see that one in my cactus garden photos later. But this is the couple pictures of the blooms. So the bottom picture is actually our Colorado Blue Star, while the bigger bloom over on the right is the Eastern Blue Star. Here is the Eastern Blue Star in the garden, so it's right in the middle. And you can see the very leafy foliage, how full it looks, so it feels more traditional. It doesn't feel a little wild or crazy. But another really great thing about this plant is come fall, it turns this bright yellow. So it's an amazing filler that is green all summer. It has the blue flower in early spring, and then come fall, it's just this pop of yellow that fills the garden bed. And in front of this one, you can actually see our Rudbeckia, the dead flower stalks from the Rudbeckia. in front of that. That's like the black and brown kind of balls that are floating on the stems. But having that yellow background or filler just makes that flower stand out. Next, I want to talk about another great plant that's not heavily used, and that's curly leaf sea kale. So this perennial has these big leaves, and oftentimes when people think about traditional landscapes, they're thinking about things that are more leafy, that are more green, and this one fulfills that role. It has a very big leaf, which I would consider coarse, and it becomes a really beautiful foliage in your landscape. So it blooms white in early spring. So here it is in our garden, and this has to be, I would say, in April. And this section of our garden gets very little water. So if you have a tough, hot, dry spot that you want some early flower color, this is a great plant that gives you that more traditional feeling. You can see how big it is and how much ground it covers. And in this photo here, it's actually over on the left. So this is the same blue star in the middle, but this curly sea kale is over on the left, and it's just starting to bloom as it's going to cascade down that rock wall. So it's a great early blooming white flower that has a more traditional feel. Next, I want to talk about another native. This is Chieftain Manzanita. So Manzanita is the big cousin to Kinnikinnick. Most people know about Kinnikinnick, that, broadleaf evergreen that's underneath pine trees in the forest. This is a larger, bigger shrubby version of that same type of plant. So you can see the flowers and the foliage in that close-up shot, but Kinnikinnick is this great ground cover. So right now in this photo on the right, it's actually trailing over a rock wall. So it only gets to be like 18 inches taller or so, but it'll cover the ground. It'll get to be 5 to 8 feet wide, and it has these really beautiful cinnamon colored branches with these green leaves that stay on all winter. So if you were to go outside right now in the garden, it looks like this. Now, Kinnikinnick is one of the very first things to bloom in our garden. So it is probably starting to bloom right now just because of the warm weather that we've had. And the flowers are small. They're kind of these whitish pink flowers that you see in that photo. And we usually call them insignificant because it's not like it's big giant blooms that are covering the entire plant. It's these smaller flowers that are kind of tucked into the branches, so you don't see them. But with this plant, what you're really growing is this beautiful green spreading ground cover plant. Anybody who likes boxwoods would like this plant. This is like our native boxwood. Now, this isn't going to grow up in a big shrub or ball. It's going to be a ground cover. But if you like that type of plant, you're going to love this one. Here it is looking at it from straight on, but it's that same plant that's cascading down the wall. It's just a beautiful plant. Now, I can't talk about traditional water-wise landscapes without talking about spruces. So St. Mary's broom spruce is my favorite little tidy blue spruce. Now, I would not use it in a super hot sunny location, but I would use it maybe close to a tree or close to a swale that comes off of a downspout off my house. Because although spruces are native, you usually find them a little bit higher in elevation and usually find them on the north side of the mountain, which just means that the snow there is going to stay a little bit longer and it's going to get a little bit more moisture than those south-facing slopes where you're going to find ponderosas. So spruces are water-wise, but I like to place them in a way where they're not going to be exposed to really, really hot, intense sun, where they might get a little bit of protection. And then, watering it once a week is not going to be a problem. It's going to love that, or even watering every other week. It's going to love that too. So it really becomes water-wise if you can site it correctly. Now, other plants in this photo, over on the left, we have catmint. Catmint is not native as well, but man, does it do a great job here, and it's super low water and resilient. And then over on the right is a Dalmatian iris. Now, this Dalmatian iris has a two-toned leaf. So it has a white strip and then like a lightish greenish blue strip. And when it blooms, usually in late May, the blossoms on this iris smell like grape juice. So every time this is blooming, I park in front of this spot because this is also at our garden, and I smell these flowers before I go inside because they smell amazing. And after the flowers are done, you still have this beautiful upright leaf that has the two-toned variability. So it still is a very striking combination and gives you very interesting foliage color, even though it's no longer blooming. So if you want low maintenance, you want easy, and you want resilient, irises are a great solution, and this one is my favorite. Another really common plant that is low water that is very traditional is peonies. People don't realize how low water peonies can be. And this one, especially this Ito peony morning lilac, has this big, beautiful pink flowers that make it feel like you're in the Bahamas or something. I mean, it just feels like you should be in a really wet environment, and you're not. It loves it here in Colorado. So although peonies aren't native to this space, if you want a traditional feeling, this is a for sure plant that I would put on your list. So this particular one is going to get 2 to 3 feet wide, 2 to 3 feet tall. You can water it about once a week and it's going to be happy. And it also works as a great filler. So similar to the Eastern Blue Star that's kind of bushy, peonies, after they're done blooming, are also bushy and they also turn yellow in the fall. So it does a good job having like all of the requirements that you want in a landscape plant. Here's another one that I really like. This is Bowl of Beauty peony, and here you can see it next to our herb garden. And this big pink blossom in that May, June timeframe, it just kind of sets the stage for summer and lets us know that, summer is officially here and the garden is in full bloom. So now I want to talk about organized nature planting beds. So those were all the traditional plants that make it feel very traditional and welcoming, even though they're low water and drought resilient. But this next section is really more talking about embracing plants and using them in combinations that allows it to be more naturalistic. So this first photo that's on the screen right now, this is Tennessee coneflower. Tennessee coneflower isn't a native, but it does really, really well and naturalizes here quite well. If you wanted a native echinacea, you could use pallida, Echinacea pallida, and that's going to be a little bit taller, but still a great plant. And then with this echinacea is actually little blue stem, and little blue stem turns bright red in fall. So this combination I think is just extremely enchanting. And this is actually in the tree lawn space. And both of these plants have naturalized. So they're seeding themselves and filling in that space, and the homeowner is having to do very little. They basically deadhead the echinacea and then cut it all back down to the ground in spring, and that's it. So it's a wonderful way to bring in plants to your landscape, but keeping your maintenance quite low. And they do water this about once a week to every 2 weeks, depending on if there's any rain or not. So to really get a place to fill in, I do recommend that you water, but you don't have to water a lot. So again, we're going to be talking about native and well-adapted plants that really need to be watered maybe once a week to one time a month. And it's going to create very resilient landscapes. This photo here, this is our entryway at our garden. And we have some Mexican feathergrass in here. We have this little Engelmann daisy that's just starting to grow. We have the baby blue rabbit brush. That's a little silver guy that's kind of bushy on the right. And these plants will fill in with time. In fact, this is what it looked like, I believe, by year 3. So here, all these plants have really filled in. Now there's more growing in this photo. So the little yellow guy that's kind of in the front, that is Mesa Verde penstemon. It's a pine leaf penstemon. And then the blue next to it, the purplish blue, most people think that's going to be catmint, but it's not. That is actually platinum sage, which is a beautiful, tight, low ground cover. It's a very tight silver foliage ground cover, and then it gets these flower heads that come up that we cut back after they bloom. And then in the wall, the silver one that's poking through the rocks, that is actually desert purple sage. And it keeps these flower heads, you'll see in the next photo, for a good part of the winter. And across the back, those kind of brown balls, that was actually ambassador allium that we planted. And those bloom in June. So this is probably a little bit later than that. They bloom May, June. But the structure on those plants, even when they're done blooming, are still really powerful and beautiful. So here it is kind of middle of summer, and then here it is at the end of summer. So what's great about this naturalistic style landscaping is that you don't feel like you have to maintain it as much. You can kind of let these natural earth tones come through, these silvers, these beiges, and really lean into what nature looks like even in late in the season. So this is after the baby blue rabbit brush has bloomed. So this is going to be closer to October when we're taking this photo. Now, if you have a really hot location that's full sun and maybe you're going to use some rock mulch, this combination is awesome. So here we have some little Trudy catmint. Now there's lots of different catmint out there. Little Trudy is one that stays about 12 inches by 12 inches. Really uniform, really tight, doesn't seed as much as some of the other ones. And then in the front, we have Undaunted Ruby Muley. That is an amazing, actually cool season grass that loves heat. So it prefers being out in the middle of this parking lot, surrounded by rock and surrounded by concrete. And next to that, this kind of shorter green ground cover plant, this is a Santa Fe phlox. I got this from High Country Gardens, and it has been a knockout plant at our garden. It starts to bloom early in the season, so this has to be kind of May, June timeframe, and it'll bloom all the way to October. So it's an amazing perennial that comes back year after year, is low water, likes hot microclimates, and is really drought resilient. And throughout this bed, I have some Allium Christophini. So this is a shorter allium that gets flower heads that are about 6 inches wide. And I like using alliums or bulbs as a way just to add some interest. The allium is usually a plant that only lasts a handful of years, but this Christophini is one that lasts a really long time. So I planted this probably close to 7 years ago, and it's still performing and looks great to this day. Now this bed is actually our main sign by the road. And so in here we have some more of the baby blue rabbit brush, which is one of my favorite super low water, drought resilient, good looking plants. And we have some Undaunted Ruby Muley in the middle. This is some more of that ambassador allium. So this is a little bit earlier in the year. You can see those pinkish purple floating balls in the space. And then the yellow behind that allium and over on the left-hand side of your screen, that is a false indigo. Now, this yellow one is called American Goldfinch, which is a pretty unique plant. The one that most people are familiar with is actually the blue, the wild blue indigo. And wild blue indigo, or Baptisia, is native on the very eastern side of Colorado. So kind of as you're getting into Kansas, you're going to find that plant. But it's an amazing plant. It has this beautiful big flower that blooms early and just adds a lot of interest to the landscape. You can actually use that plant in your more traditional systems as well. So here it is earlier in the year, and then here it is at the end of the season. So this again is going to be in that September, October timeframe, because there's actually buffalo grass over on the right that's going into fall color. And you can see the pink plume on the Undaunted Ruby Muley. You can also see the flower heads and the baby blue rabbit brush are done, but you just get that beautiful tan seed head. And then you can see the texture from the sunset hyssop with a few remaining flowers. Actually, the ones in the back are blooming quite heavily still. And then I also like the Mexican feathergrass, which is the grass close to the sign, just for that beautiful tan texture that it brings. So you can make a planting bed feel full and lush and beautiful, but still have it be very low water. So just to bring a few more plants to the table when we get to this more naturalistic low water solution, this is a good eye catcher. So this is tidy leaf pea shrub, or tidy, and it's going to get to be 8 to 10 feet tall with 5 to 7 foot spread. It is very, very low water. In fact, Here it is in the garden with absolutely no irrigation, and it's just blooming its little head off. So here, this picture has got to be kind of our April, May timeframe because the catmint is blooming as well. But this whole section has absolutely no irrigation to it. So all this plant material is as drought resilient as you can get. And it's really easy. All we do is cut back the gray rabbit brush. Every few years, we trim it back a little bit just to keep it smaller. And then we cut back the catmint to the ground, and we don't even touch the tidy leaf pea shrub. It is just this great shrub that has this beautiful yellow, very vibrant flower on it early in the season. Another favorite of mine for planting beds for plants that are resilient is Apache plume. Apache plume is this native shrub that has these wonderful white flowers on it for most of the season. And it's called Flugia paradoxa because it's a paradox because it's actually blooming while it's seeding. Most plants don't do that, but this one does. And the seed heads are almost like these little lorax trees where they're really puffy and feathery, and they have these pink ribs that go through them. So it's just a beautiful plant from the flower to the seed head. It is more on the naturalistic side, so you do want to give it space to grow, and you definitely don't want to try to prune this one into a ball or any type of shape. Let it be naturalistic. But it's an amazing performing, easy to grow shrub that really doesn't need any water once established. Another pea shrub that I love is the pygmy pea shrub. So here's a close-up of the flowers. It says, again, a bright yellow flower, but this shrub is very low to the ground. It's only like 2 feet tall, but it can be 3 to 4 feet wide. And so you can actually make a beautiful hedge out of it. The hospital in Castle Rock actually has this around their entire parking lot. And I know this because my niece was born there in May, and that's when this plant was blooming, and it looked stunning. And then the rest of the summer, it's just going to have these little tidy green leaves, but you don't prune this plant. This is just how it grows. So if you want a nice medium to short sized shrub to fill in the space, but give you some spring flower, this is your plant, and it really doesn't need much water at all. Another favorite plant of mine is lead plant. So similar to the Baptisia, this is native, but you're going to find it more out on the plains. And I like to call this our native Russian sage. So most people are familiar with Russian sage, that purple plant that flowers in kind of August. But this is a native version, and it has these really beautiful purple flowers with these orange stamens. So the flowers are even more intense than the Russian sage. This does bloom early in the year. It doesn't bloom as late as the Russian sage, but this is actually providing, some nectar for our pollinators, and it's helping support our ecosystem. Where Russian sage, there's nothing native about it, and it can take over. This one doesn't do that. So it's, a nice small to medium shrub, 2 to 4 feet tall and wide, and 3 to 4 feet wide. And it's very low to low water. So once established, you don't have to water this one either. Here it is in our old cactus garden. And I like this photo because you can really see the orange stamens at the end of those flowers. So really cool, really unique shrub. Now I want to talk a little bit about cacti because I don't think you can talk about designing a drought resilient landscape and not hitting on cacti. Cacti are natives. This is our red claret cup that we have, and I think that it's really quite beautiful. Catherine and I redid our cactus garden in 2018, and when you see it in spring, so that I say spring, this is actually like the beginning of June, what you notice more is the agave, is the prickly pear, is the choyas, like the yuccas. That's what you see in this landscape earlier in the season. So I just want to point out a few of these plants, and but I'm going to show you a progression of this planting bed area. So in the shrubby green thing behind that pot, that's Windwalker Royal Red Salvia. You'll see in a bit. In the back, we have one of my favorite trees, Russian hawthorn, super drought resilient, but it also has this white flower in spring, and then it's covered in these red small fruits that are persistent through the winter. And what's cool about hawthorns is birds will eat the fruit, but they have to freeze and thaw several times before they eat them. Then in the middle, we have some prairie fire puncha. So that's one of our prickly pears, and it's got this beautiful yellow bloom. Over on the right, we have Blackfoot daisy, which is a native perennial for us. And It just gets loaded with white flowers later in the summer. And this little silver guy up front is partridge feather. And then, of course, we have some undaunted ruby muley grass kind of going around these pots in the landscape. And one other favorite of mine is prairie zinnia. It's a great spreading ground cover that's loaded with yellow flowers for a good part of the season. So here it is, middle of summer. You can see the prairie zinnia, all that yellow ground cover, and you can see that Blackfoot daisy, the white little flower on the right. But what you may not notice is the cacti tend to blend at this point. They are no longer the focal of the garden. They become a supporting cast. And that's what I think is so neat about incorporating them, is you can use them in a way that you notice them at certain times of year, but then the rest of the year they blend into that landscape. Because when I tell people to consider cacti, they usually look at me like, ah, Lisa, you're crazy. That's full of spines and sharp things, and I don't want that in my landscape. But you can actually create a really stunning landscape by incorporating them. So this is actually that same garden just from the other end, and this is where it's backlit. So that reddish pink plant in back is the Windwalker Royal Red Salvia, and then that pink plume across the front is more of that undaunted ruby muley. I also love to point out the snow leopard cholla over on the right. So that's the really prickly one where you can just see all those spines being illuminated by the sun. And then I also like to point kind of over in the left center, there is some prickly pear that has the ruby muley behind it. And you can see how that shadow stands out against those grass plumes and just looks beautiful in a way you don't expect cactus to be. Here it is again, without it being backlit, but much later in the season. So undaunted ruby muley, prairie zinnia across the front. You can see it's still blooming its little head off, even though plants in the background are getting fall color. Pencil stick cholla in the back, Windwalker Royal Red Salvia, and then some opuntia or prickly pear across the front. So just a wonderful landscape that I think more people should consider. And then in wintertime, people will also say, oh, they just look too bad in wintertime. Cacti actually bring a lot of structure to your garden, especially in the winter. So just consider it. So not only can cacti be incorporated, but they can be a focal point. So here, and this is one of our volunteers' landscapes. And right in the center, she has a century plant, this agave, that's actually blooming. But look how amazing it looks amongst all of these other wonderful perennials. So in the end, this is kind of the close. Designing drought-ready landscapes, what I want you to consider is how to use native or low-water grasses to replace your lawn, combine planting beds for a prairie-style garden, or go wild and mix up the species in those larger spaces that maybe you're transitioning to open space. And when it comes to planting beds, use better plants. Look to nature for inspiration, but look for those unique native or pseudo-native plants, because ultimately those are going to be way more drought resilient than our standard spireas, Karl Foresters, golden vocari privet that you can see at any box store. So using these types of landscapes are not only a drought solution, but they're really a better solution. They're a better solution for our environment, for our pollinators, and our people. So dig in, literally, look for inspiration. This is actually an area at Denver Botanic Gardens where you can see buffalo grass along the edge that's mowed. And then that naturalistic prairie garden in the back. I think it's a beautiful example of what we can do here with our native plants, because ultimately these plants are all around you. You just have to find them, find what they are, and then figure out how to incorporate it in your landscape. So my last thing I'll say is that, you know, the oldest task in human history is to live on a piece of land without spoiling it. This is a quote from Aldo Leopold. And I love this concept because I think we're in a place, we're at a time where we're looking to nature and bringing them back into our urban environments. We're bringing them back to our cities because our precious water resource means that we can't use it to water these high water lawns and use that as a predominant landscape treatment. We need to find other solutions. And when our other solutions can look like this, it means we have a lot of options. So with that, Jake, what questions do we have? What questions do you have? How would you like to spend our last couple minutes?
Well, Kathleen asks, we are new owners of a Greeley house. How can we tell what grass we currently have? And if you have any uh, suggestions about that.
Yeah, so you can, I think UC Davis has a great online key for grasses. So you can try to use that to identify what you have. Jake, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm just gonna say if you live in Greeley, you probably have Kentucky bluegrass or a fescue mix or something like that. Um, that is the predominant grass that's used in the landscape, in the urban landscape.
Yeah, I would
Would you
absolutely
agree?
agree. Yeah, I would absolutely agree with you. And Kathleen, if you wanna, I'm gonna put my number and my email in the chat too. So write that down, and I can come out and take a look at it too for you, and we can find out what you got. Um, Also, another question, we will post the recording of this presentation online. It'll be on our website. I'll also throw that in the chat. Christine is asking, how can I find a landscaper who's knowledgeable about this design?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I generally find that when you're talking to the contractors and if you're asking about drought resilient, native grass solutions, native planting beds, or well-adapted plants, you're gonna find they're either gonna pretty quickly be like, oh yeah, I do that. I like barberry and Carl Forrester and daylily. And if they say that, that's not the person you want. Because those are the plants that they do well in a well irrigated environment. But if you really want drought resilient, if you really want low water, you need to have a designer who's talking about blue grama, buffalo, little blue stem, these native grasses that are here in this shortgrass prairie where we live. So those would be just some of the things I would talk about with them. It's like, what do you know about this? What do you think about this? I will tell you there are lots of contractors who'll be like, yeah, that native grass doesn't work. I have been doing native grass solutions for the last 15 years. We've helped 200 customers in Colorado Springs, residential customers, convert over, I think we're close to 10 acres now of high water turf grass to native grass solutions, and it does work, and it is a great solution. You do have to change some of your pesticides. You can't use like weed and feed off the shelf, but these native grasses work and they work really darn well. I hope
A
that
follow-up,
answers that.
yeah, a follow-up to that question is, should I look for someone with a particular degree or certification?
Mm, okay. I don't think degree. I have a degree in landscape horticulture with an emphasis in design and contracting from Colorado State University. But I also have my Master Gardener certificate. I'm Quell certified. I'm CLIA certified. Like I've got all the alphabet soup going on after my name. And I don't think any of those certifications really preach to this yet. I think they preach around the idea of being efficient with water use, but most of those certifications are national certifications, and so they don't really get into our native plant palette. So it's more about asking them questions, seeing how they feel about using native grasses and how familiar they are. Um, you'll know pretty quick if they're a fan or not because they're going to be like me where they can't stop talking about it, or they're just going to want to push Kentucky bluegrass and tell you that it doesn't work. So just ask them the questions and see how they respond. That's going to get you there.
Great, thank you. One other question, where do we purchase natural plants for plant beds?
Ooh, okay. So there are more and more nurseries trying to get real native plants available. So there's more accessibility now than there was even 20 years ago. So a lot of your nurseries, you're going to be able to find lead plant, Baptisia, Manzanita, even Eastern Blue Star. I usually can find that pretty consistently. But if you can't, a great resource you guys have in your area is actually the High Plains Environmental Center. They do a native plant sale every spring, and they have tons of native plants that they grow that are perfect for your area. So I would definitely go check them out. Look online, see when they're hosting that sale because it is pretty early. There's also a great plant sale at Denver Botanic Gardens, and you can find a lot of these plants online as well. So like the Santa Fe phlox I mentioned, that's something that you can get from High Country Gardens. But you can get things like Blonde Ambition, Blue Grama, Undaunted Ruby Muley, Little Blue Stem. You can buy those at most nurseries. So it's becoming more and more popular. So we're seeing the availability go way up.
Great, thank you. Cheryl is asking, how do you remove existing grass?
Yeah, so when it comes to an existing lawn, people often say, well, can I just seed my native grass into it? And I say, no, it doesn't work that way because as soon as you start watering to get your native grass to grow, those seedlings to germinate, your existing grass is going to take over. So the best way is to remove it. Or you can kill it. So you can kill it by smothering it with like cardboards or really heavy tarp, but that's going to take an entire season to achieve that. Or you can just get a sod cutter or hire a couple neighbor kids to come over with a shovel and remove your existing grass. But you really do have to start over if you want to convert to a native grass solution. Great.
Well,
Somebody said that was awesome. Woohoo!
I think that's it. Lisa, this was so informative. We appreciate it so much. Thank you. I'm going to put my information in the chat as well. Please, again, I'm Jake Robinson with the City of Greeley Water Efficiency. Give me a call, email me, visit our website. We'd be more than happy to come out and help you out. Lisa, thanks so much for this really informative chat. It's been great.
All right.
Bye,
Well,
Bruce.
thanks, everybody. Have a great evening.
All right. Bye, everyone.